Part 8. Courfeyrac suddenly perceived somebody at the foot of the barricade, outside in the street, under the balls. Gavroche had taken a basket from the wine shop, had gone out by the opening, and was quietly occupied in emptying into his basket the full cartridge boxes of the National Guards who had been killed on the slope of the redoubt. "What are you doing there?" said Courfeyrac. Gavroche cocked up his nose. "Citizen, I am filling my basket." "Why, don't you see the grape?" Gavroche answered. "Well, it rains. What then?" Courfeyrac cried. "Come back! Directly!" said Gavroche, and with a bound he sprang into the street. Some 20 dead lay scattered along the whole length of the street of the pavement. 20 cartridge boxes for Gavroche, a supply of cartridges for the barricade. The smoke in the street was like a fog. This obscurity, probably desired and calculated upon by the leaders who had directed the assault upon the barricade, was of use to Gavroche. Under the folds of this veil of smoke, and thanks to his small size, he could advance far into the street without being seen. He emptied the first 7 or 8 cartridge boxes without much danger. He crawled on his belly, ran on his hands and feet, took his basket in his teeth, twisted, glided, writhed, wormed his way from one body to another, and emptied a cartridge box as a monkey opens a nut. From the barricade, of which he was still within hearing, they dared not call him to return, for fear of attracting attention to him. On one corpse, that of a corporal, he found a powder flask. "In case of thirst," said he, as he put it into his pocket. By successive advances he reached a point where the fog from the firing became transparent, so that the sharpshooters of the line drawn up and on the alert behind their wall of paving stones, and the sharpshooters of the banlieue massed at the corner of the street suddenly discovered something moving in the smoke. Just as Gavroche was relieving of his cartridges a sergeant who lay near a stone block, a ball struck the body. "The deuce!" said Gavroche. "So they're killing my dead for me?" A second ball splintered the pavement beside him. A third upset his basket. Gavroche looked and saw that it came from the banlieue. He rose up straight, on his feet, his hair in the wind, his hands upon his hips, his eyes fixed upon the National Guards who were firing, and he sang. On allait à Nater, c'est le faux au voteur, et Betla Berlesso, c'est le faux au réseau. Then he picked up his basket, put it into the cartridges which had fallen out, and without losing a single one, advancing towards the fusillade, began to empty another cartridge box. There a fourth ball just mixed him again. Gavroche sang. Je ne suis pas notaire, c'est la faute au voteur. Je suis petit oiseau, c'est la faute au réseau. A fifth ball succeeded in drawing only a third couplet from him. Joie et mon caractère, c'est la faute au Voltaire. Misère et mon trousseau, c'est la faute au Rousseau. This continued thus for some time. The sight was appalling and fascinating. Gavroche, fired at, mocked the firing. He appeared very much amused. It was the sparrow pecking at the hunters. He replied to each discharge by a couplet. They aimed at him incessantly. They always missed him. The National Guards and the soldiers laughed as they aimed at him. He lay down, then rose up, hid himself in a doorway, then sprang out, disappeared, reappeared, escaped, returned, retorted upon the volleys by wry faces, and meanwhile pillaged cartridges, emptied cartridge boxes, and filled his basket. The insurgents, breathless with anxiety, followed him with their eyes. The barricade was trembling. He was singing. It was not a child. It was not a man. It was a strange fairy gamin. One would have said the invulnerable dwarf of the Malay. The bullets ran after him. He was more nimble than they. He was playing an indescribably terrible game of hide and seek with death. Every time the flat-nosed face of the spectre approached, the gamin slapped his fingers. One bullet, however, better aimed or more treacherous than the others, reached the will-o'-wisp child. They saw Gavroche totter, then he fell. The whole barricade gave a cry, but there was an Antaeus in this pygmy. For the gamin to touch the pavement is like the giant touching the earth. Gavroche had fallen only to rise again. He sat up, a long stream of blood rolled down his face. He raised both arms in the air, looked in the direction whence the shot came, and began to sing. Je suis tombé par terre, c'est la faute au Voltaire. L'année dans le ruisseau, c'est la faute à... He did not finish. A second ball from the same marksman cut him short. This time he fell with his face upon the pavement, and did not stir again. That little great soul had taken flight. Part 9. Marius had sprung out of the barricade. Combeferre had followed him, but it was too late. Gavroche was dead. Combeferre brought back the basket of cartridges. Marius brought back the child. When Marius re-entered the redoubt with Gavroche in his arms, His face, like the child's, was covered with blood. Just as he had stooped down to pick up Gavroche, a ball grazed his skull. He did not perceive it. Courfeyrac took off his cravat and bound up Marius' forehead. They laid Gavroche on the same table with Mabeuf, and they stretched the black shawl over the two bodies. It was large enough for the old man and the child. Combeferre distributed the cartridges from the basket which he had brought back. This gave each man 15 shots. Jean Valjean was still at the same place, motionless upon his block. When Combeferre presented him his 15 cartridges, he shook his head. "This is a rare eccentric," said Combeferre in a low tone to Enjolras. "He finds means not to fight in this barricade." "Which does not prevent him from defending it," answered Enjolras. A notable fact. The fire which was battering the barricade hardly disturbed the interior. Those who have never passed through the whirlwind of this kind of war can have no idea of the singular moments of tranquillity which are all mingled with these convulsions. Combeferre, with apron at his waist, was dressing the wounded. Bossuet and Foy were making cartridges with the flask of powder taken by Gavroche from the dead corporal, and Bossuet said to Foy, "We shall soon take the diligence for another planet." Courfeyrac, upon the few paving stones which he had reserved for himself near Enjolras, was disposing and arranging a whole arsenal. His sword cane, his musket, 2 sword pistols, and a pocket pistol, with the care of a girl who was putting a little workbox in order. Jean Valjean was looking in silence at the opposite wall. A working man was fastening on his head, with a string, a large straw hat belonging to Mother Hucheloup, for fear of sunstroke, said he. The young men of the Cour Gaudet were chatting gaily with one another, as if they were in a hurry to talk patois for the last time. Joly, who had taken down the widow Hucheloup's mirror, was examining his tongue in it. A few combatants, having discovered more crusts of bread, almost mouldy in a drawer, were eating them greedily. Marius was anxious about what his father would say to him. Part 10. We must dwell on a psychological fact, peculiar to barricades. Nothing which characterizes this surprising war of the streets should be omitted. There is an apocalypse in civil war. All the mists of the unknown are mingled with these savage flames. Revolutions are sphinxes, and he who has passed through a barricade believes he has passed through a dream. What is felt in those places, as we have indicated in reference to Marius, and as we shall see in what follows, is more and is less than life. Once out of the barricade, a man no longer knows what he has seen in it. He was terrible, he does not know it. He was surrounded by combating ideas which had human faces. He had his head in the light of the future. There were corpses lying and phantoms standing. The hours were colossal and seemed hours of eternity. He lived in death. Shadows passed by. What were they? He saw hands on which there was blood. It was an appalling uproar. It was also a hideous silence. There were open mouths which shouted, and other open mouths which held their peace. He was in the smoke, in the night perhaps. He thinks he has touched the ominous ooze of the unknown depths. He sees something red in his nails. He remembers nothing more. Let us return to the Rue de la Chanvrerie. Suddenly, between 2 discharges, they heard the distant sound of a clock striking. "It is noon," said Combeferre. The 12 strokes had not sounded when Enjolras sprang to his feet and flung down from the top of the barricade this thundering shout. "Carry some paving stones into the house. Fortify the windows with them. Half the men to the muskets, the other half to the stones. Not a minute to lose." A platoon of sappers, their axes on their shoulders, had just appeared in order of battle at the end of the street. This could only be the head of a column. And of what column? The column of attack, evidently. The sappers, whose duty it is to demolish the barricade, must always precede the soldiers, whose duty it is to scale it. Enjolras' order was executed with the correct haste peculiar to ships and barricades. The only places of combat where escape is impossible. In less than a minute, 2/3 of the paving stones which Enjolras had piled up at the door of Corinth were carried up to the first story into the garret, and before a second minute had elapsed, these stones, artistically laid one upon the other, walled up half the height of the window of the first story and the dormer windows of the attic. A few openings, carefully arranged by Foy, chief builder, allowed musket barrels to pass through. The armament of the windows could be performed the more easily since the grape had ceased. The 2 pieces were now firing balls upon the centre of the wall in order to make a hole, and if it was possible, a breach for the assault. Then they barricaded the basement window, and they held in readiness the iron crosspieces which served to bar the door of the wine shop on the inside at night. The fortress was complete. The barricade was the rampart, the wine shop was the donjon. With the paving stones which remained, they closed up the opening beside the barricade. Enjolras said to Marius, "We are the 2 chiefs. I will give the last orders within. You stay outside and watch." Marius posted himself for observation upon the crest of the barricade. Enjolras had the door of the kitchen, which you remember was the hospital, nailed up. "No spattering on the wounded," said he. He gave his last instructions in the basement room, in a quick but deep and calm voice. Foy listened, and answered in the name of all. "First story. Hold your axes ready to cut the staircase. Have you them?" "Yes," said Foy. "How many?" "Two axes and a poleaxe." "Very well. There are 26 effective men left." "How many muskets are there?" 34. "Eight too many. Keep those 8 muskets loaded like the rest and at hand. Swords and pistols in your belts. 20 men to the barricade. 6 in ambush at the dormer windows. At the window in the first story to fire upon the assailants through the loopholes in the paving stones. Let there be no useless labourer here. Immediately, when the drum beats the charge, let the 20 from below rush to the barricade. There, the first there will get the best places." These dispositions made, he turned to Javert and said to him, "I won't forget you." And laying a pistol on the table, he said, "The last man to leave this room will blow out the spy's brains." "Here?" inquired a voice. "No, do not leave this corpse with ours. You can climb over the little barricade on the Rue Montour. It is only 4 feet high. The man is well tied. You will take him there and execute him there." There was one man at that moment who was more impassable than Enjolras. It was Javert. Here Jean Valjean appeared. He was in the throng of insurgents. He stepped forward and said to Enjolras, "You are the commander." "Yes." "You thanked me just now." "In the name of the Republic, the barricade has 2 saviors, Marius Pontmercy and you." "Do you think I deserve a reward?" "Certainly." "Well, I ask one." "What?" "To blow out that man's brains myself." Javert raised his head, saw Jean Valjean, made an imperceptible movement, and said, "That is appropriate." As for Enjolras, he had begun to reload his carbine. He cast his eyes about him. "No objection." And turning toward Jean Valjean, "Take the spy." Jean Valjean, in fact, took possession of Javert by sitting down on the end of the table. He caught up the pistol, and a slight click announced that he had cocked it. Almost at the same moment, they heard a flourish of trumpets. "Come on!" cried Marius from the top of the barricade. Javert began to laugh with that noiseless laugh which was peculiar to him, and looking fixedly upon the insurgents, said to them, "Your health is hardly better than mine." "All outside!" cried Enjolras. The insurgents sprang forward in tumult, and as they went out, they received in the back, allows the expression, this speech from Javert: "Farewell until immediately." Part 9. When Jean Valjean was alone with Javert, he untied the rope that held the prisoner by the middle of the body, and drawing after him, went out of the wine shop, slowly, for Javert, with his legs fettered, could take only very short steps. Jean Valjean had the pistol in his hand. They crossed thus the interior trapezium of the barricade. The insurgents, intent upon the imminent attack, were looking the other way. Marius alone, placed toward the left extremity of the wall, saw them pass. The group of the victim and the executioner borrowed a light from the sepulchral gleam which he had in his soul. Jean Valjean, with some difficulty, bound as Javert was, but without letting go of him for a single instant, made him scale the little entrenchment of the Rue Montour. When they climbed over this wall, they found themselves alone in the little street. Nobody saw them now. The owner of the house hid them from insurgents. The corpses, carried out from the barricades, made a terrible mound a few steps off. They distinguished in a heap of dead a livid face, a flowing head of hair, a wounded hand, and a woman's breast half naked. It was Éponine. Javert looked aside at this dead body, and perfectly calm, said in an undertone, "It seems to me that I know that girl." Then he turned toward Jean Valjean. Jean Valjean put the pistol under his arm and fixed upon Javert a look which had no need of words to say, "Javert, it is I." Javert answered, "Take your revenge." Jean Valjean took a knife out of his pocket and opened it. "A Seurat," exclaimed Javert. "You are right. That suits you better." Jean Valjean cut the martingale, which Javert had about his neck. Then he cut the ropes which he had on his wrist. Then, stooping down, he cut the cord which he had on his feet. And rising, he said to him, "You are free." Javert was not easily astonished. Still, complete master as he was of himself, he could not escape an emotion. He stood aghast and motionless. Jean Valjean continued, "I don't expect to leave this place. Still, if by chance I should live, I live under the name of Fauchelevent, in the Rue de l'Homme Armé, number 7. Javert had the scowl of a tiger, half opening the corner of his mouth, and he muttered between his teeth, "Take care." "Go," said Jean Valjean. Javert resumed. "You said Fauchelevent, Rue de l'Homme Armé?" "Number 7." Javert repeated in an undertone. "Number 7." He buttoned his coat, restored the military stiffness between his shoulders, turned half around, folded his arms, supporting his chin with one hand, and walked off in the direction of the markets. Jean Valjean followed him with his eyes. After a few steps, Javert turned back and cried to Jean Valjean, "You annoy me. Kill me, rather." Javert did not notice that his tone was more respectful towards Jean Valjean. "Go away," said Jean Valjean. Javert receded with slow steps. A moment afterward, he turned the corner of the Rue de Prêcheur. When Javert was gone, Jean Valjean fired the pistol in the air. Then he entered the barricade and said, "It is done." Meanwhile, what had taken place is this. Marius, busy rather with the street than the wine shop, had not until then looked attentively at the spy who was bound in the dusky rear of the basement room. When he saw him in broad day, clambering over the barricade on his way to die, he recognized him. A sudden reminiscence came into his mind. He remembered the inspector of the Rue de Pontoise, and the 2 pistols which he had handed him, and which he had used, he, Marius, in this very barricade. And not only did he recollect the face, but he recalled the name. This reminiscence, however, was misty and indistinct, like all his ideas. It was not an affirmation, which he made to himself. It was a question which he put. "Is that not that inspector of police who told me his name was Javert?" Was there perhaps still time to interfere for this man? But first he must know if it were indeed that Javert. Marius called to Enjolras, who had just taken his place at the other end of the barricade. "Enjolras!" "What?" "What is that man's name?" "Who?" "The police officer. Do you know his name?" "Of course, he told us." "What is his name?" "Javert." Marius sprang up. At that moment they heard the pistol shot. Jean Valjean reappeared and cried, "It is done." A dreary chill passed through the heart of Marius.